for the most part, having a ventriloquist puppet on your arm and trying to do a dramatic reading of, Macbeth is probably not going to work.
I cannot remember ever seeing a Shakespearean ventriloquist.
Those are two words that have never been put together before.
Comedian, ventriloquist Taylor Mason today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. Have you ever tried to throw your voice like a professional ventriloquist? Well, then you know it's not as easy as it looks. Have you ever tried stand-up comedy? That is harder than it looks. A lot harder. Have you ever tried to entertain an audience with your music? Don't have to tell you how hard that is. But there's a guy out there who's a triple threat, who's done it all, does it all successfully, and has been doing it for years. Taylor Mason has been entertaining audiences for almost 40 years. In fact, Taylor Mason won the Star Search competition in 1991. Now, to put that in context, Drew Carey was also in Star Search at one point. Norm Macdonald also competed once. Sinbad also competed once. They didn't win. Taylor Mason won Star Search, and he's been entertaining audiences ever since. Now, I've known Taylor Mason since we were in high school together a number of years ago. So I jumped at the chance to interview him for Now I've Heard Everything. And in just a moment, our conversation.
Sit back now and let yourself get lost in this all-new interview by national radio personality Bill Thompson. Enjoy.
So here now, comedian, ventriloquist, Taylor Mason. Taylor, you are a very talented, and I say that very genuinely, comedian, ventriloquist, a musician. You got a pretty decent voice on you. And you've been doing this for many years. How does one start with a sock on the hand and wind up a world-class performer? I mean, what do you ever look back on your career path and say, how in the world did I get here?
No, I don't look back. And really, my life is definitely, there's just so much going on that I don't look back, but I do have an incredible amount of stories, which is really not looking back. It's all I'm always kind of looking forward. So I'm always, I bet I've practiced, and I'm not bragging, and I'm not saying anything that other people don't do, but you probably have done these kind of interviews and radio. I don't know what to call it. I don't even know what to call what you do now, right?
I'm not sure myself.
Exactly. Interviewing people, journalism, opinion making, etc. You've been doing it for thousands of hours. I probably, just piano alone, I've probably practiced 10,000 hours in my life.
Wow.
And maybe more. Ventriloquism and comedy, honestly, from just observing, learning how to write, getting to the punchline as quickly as I possibly can, that's another 10 or 15,000 hours. And here's what I've learned, my old friend. Here's something I've learned for your audience. What is the definition of a joke? Well, there's a line, it's called a setup line, and that is followed by a paycheck. So when you start thinking in those terms, the way I have for probably 40 some odd years, my goodness, Bill, it's embarrassing to talk about how old we are. But, so you're always, I guess my point is, I'm never looking back. I'm always looking forward. I'm trying to think of a good example. All right. So this holiday, buddy, I had one of the greatest holidays I've ever had. My wife told me at Thanksgiving dinner, we had family here. She said, do not bring up politics. So the first thing I did was I brought up politics. And that worked out awesome because I didn't have to buy Christmas gifts for about 5 people. Okay, so now that line is good at the holidays, but you can't, it's one of those, it's kind of ephemeral, but that's a few hours of sitting and thinking, how many people did there's just so much that goes into it. So my point is, I'm never looking back. I'm always looking forward. And a year from now, I'll be, oh, you know what? Didn't I do a thing with Thompson where I told a pretty funny line about, you know what I mean? So I guess I look back in those ways, but I don't look back. I don't look back on, I was the opening act for Tina Turner, and that's a great story. But I don't spend my life thinking about, wow, what an amazing experience that was, and what an amazing woman African American woman at a time when African American women weren't doing anything like she was doing. And I was actually with her for 3 of these gigs. So, and it's not like I think, oh, that was so great at patting myself on the back. It was the job. I got paid. Next.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking one day, is a comedian or is a ventriloquist by definition a comedian? Because I was trying to think if I've ever seen a dramatic ventriloquist, and I can't think of one.
I think people have tried. All right. Now we're going to go deep into the weeds, pal. For those of you, and if you know Bill Thompson, and if you're familiar with his genre, I can talk this way. The Oracle at Delphi, who was influencing, let's be honest, at the time, she was kind of like a MSNBC or Fox News. She was some sort of clairvoyant. And leaders of the world at the time were going to meet her in her cave. And she would talk to people in her cave and give world leaders advice. Now, my opinion is the Oracle at Delphi was a genius, and she wasn't talking to people. She was a great ventriloquist. But at the time, there was no amplification. There were no microphones like what Bill and I are using now. There was no amplified sound. So if you could manipulate sound the way people today manipulate voters, if you could manipulate sound, you were thought to be very special. And the Oracle at Delphi had taken the skill that nobody knew about called ventriloquism and used it for what you're talking about. To me is highly dramatic purposes, but really, I mean, and it was a show. Nobody knew it at the time. Now, as ventriloquism progressed, and now we move years forward, still, remember, no amplification of sound, no microphones, none of what we know today, take for granted today. So people started using it as, your king would have the jokester in the, the guy that did all the funny stuff. Well, chances are that guy did a little bit of ventriloquism. And then in the 17 and 1800s, the beer halls in London, again, no microphones, people going on stage with some sort of what they called an automaton, puppet, slot jaw puppet. Think of a nutcracker at the time, a giant one, and would perform. And it was thought to be incredible. And they began using it as a comedy form or music. And to this day, music is still a big part of Darcy Lynn Farmer and Terry Fader are 2 that come to mind. Willie Tyler and Lester, the African-American ventriloquist, a great musician and does a lot of music in his act. And Darcy Lynn and Terry Fader also use a lot of music, and I do as well. But you're right. For the most part, having a ventriloquist puppet on your arm and trying to do a dramatic reading of, Macbeth is probably not going to work.
I was just thinking that as you said that, I cannot remember ever seeing a Shakespearean ventriloquist.
Those are 2 words that have never been put together before in this program.
But the whole idea of, I mean, all the people that you just mentioned, all these very talented ventriloquists of whom you are right there in that same class, you couldn't have, you and I were kids, you probably could not have named more than 2 or 3. Sherry Lewis, Paul Winchell, Senor Wenceslas. That was about it.
And there was another one named Jimmy Nelson, and again, I'm going to date. Yeah. He had a puppet. Now, so I went to graduate school at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and studied advertising. And one of the advertisements that they showed us that was most successful was this guy, Jimmy Nelson, a ventriloquist from the 50s and early 60s, who did a Nestle's chocolate powder mix to make chocolate milk. And his dog, Farfel, sang Nestles, Nestle's makes the very best chocolate. And then exactly. And then at the very end, the puppet is a dog and has a wooden mouth and it claps at the end. Listen to this. That's one of the most successful ads Nestle ever had, if not the most successful. And when they focus grouped it at the end, this is mid 60s, people said you have to keep the clap in. That was our favorite part of the entire performance of this 30-second, which iconic. how iconic. I graduated from college from Northwestern in '83 with a master's degree, and that is being used at
Hmm.
the biggest universities on the planet as an example of good advertising. So,
Hmm.
I mean, all these ventriloquists from our youth, as you mentioned, Sherry Lewis, uh, Paul Winchell,
Hmm.
Jimmy Nelson, even though there were a very few of them working, they had a huge influence on me and our generation.
Hmm.
And then today, not to pat myself on the back again, but I wrote a book called The Complete Idiot's Guide to
Yes.
Ventriloquism.
Yes.
I was typecast for that, obviously. And when I started studying for this book, Bill, it was unbelievable how many people are making money professionally full time. Then every cruise line has one or two
Hmm.
ventriloquists.
Hmm.
Every comedy club brings in a ventriloquist once every 2 months or so because there are just so many really good, young, very funny, talented, great. They look great, they sound great, have incredibly cool what they call ventriloquist figures. You and I call it puppets, whatever. It's a boom art. It really is. It's been America's Got Talent has changed the entire ventriloquist the outlook because they use so many ventriloquists on the shows, or they have until the last couple of years. It's been a big boon in the industry,
So you've spent so much time in your career talking through the mouth of a character.
right?
What does it feel like now? You have a podcast, and now you get to use your own voice all the time. And unless you're speaking through Dave and Don, perhaps.
That's I don't want to insult those two, even though they probably deserve it. So, if in my let's, for lack of a better word, let's call what I have a career. So this is what I have done in my career. I was a ventriloquist, then I was a musical director, I was a comedy writer, then I was a ventriloquist again, then I was a stand-up comic, then I was a musical director. Then I was a writer, ventriloquist, musical director. And now when you see my live performance, there's no real, a lot. When you go to a comedy club, you're usually going to see three acts on the show, what they call the opening act or the MC, followed by the middle or the feature act, followed by the headliner. That's the classic stand-up comedy format. Three
Mhm.
acts, opener, middle, headliner. In my career, it's so bizarre. I haven't had the luxury of the opening and middle act. I've had to serve as my own opening act, my own middle act, and my own headliner. And in that format, I do stand-up comedy in my show. I do ventriloquism. I do a lot of music. And, there's probably pros and cons to doing that, but for me, it's kept me going. I'm 68 years old and I'm still, my calendar's,
Do you also take drink orders?
yes. you know, whatever it is. I don't know, man. I don't know.
Well, all right. So your podcast is Stories Unlimited,
Yes.
and how did you get started with that?
Okay. So I wrote a book called Taylor Mason Irreversible or
Yes,
Irreversible.
I've read. By the way, I highly recommend that. It's a very interesting book.
All right. So it's got a lot of good reviews, and it so happened that I had graduated Northwestern with a buddy named Dave Casey. Dave Casey is the advertising writer who came up with Chester Cheeto, who to this day is on the bag of every bag of Cheetos that you buy, Chester Cheeto. So Dave's daughter gave him my book for Christmas a couple of years ago. We had not spoken for a few years, and he called me and it was reading the book, and he said, I want to do a podcast about stories because my book is basically all these stories of
Hmm.
my career. I've had the wild, Bill and I graduated high school together. I went to the University of Illinois. I played college football. I was a walk-on. And that fits because what is a walk-on? A walk-on is a player who shows up at a major university, was not recruited, was not wanted, was not needed, and it's kind of like a literally a tackling dummy,
Hmm.
which I work with ventriloquist puppets known as dummies. So everything comes full circle. Anyway, from that, I ended up playing ball there for 5 years. I got what they call red shirted, so I got an extra year, and I kept a diary from the time that I first met Bill Thompson. Oh my gosh, this is really awful. in the fall of 1972.
Yeah.
So I've kept it. So I've got all these stories written down, some of which are really entertaining. So Dave Casey, an advertising copywriter, very successful, says, I want to do a podcast because his daughter, Caroline, is a very successful podcast engineer. And
Oh.
yes, so she was everything is owed to this, millennial named Caroline Casey. And she and her dad, and then Don Woodard, who is also an advertising copywriter and had worked at the Groundlings, a famous comedy troupe in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
I had worked at the Second City Theater in Chicago, a famous comedy theater, I guess you would say. So the three of us had a lot in common. And as you can tell, I have no problem coming up with something to say. So that led to Stories Unlimited. And why Stories Unlimited? It started with my thing was I wanted the title to be, Have We Got a Story for You? Which is, as you know, much too long.
Yes.
Get to the point, right? The payoff, the paycheck, the punchline, whatever you want to call that, has to be 2 words, Stories Unlimited. So that's what it became. And we've had, I think at last count, we're over 30,000 people who have subscribed or downloaded or whatever. So we're doing something right. So it's a lot of fun to do. We just recorded one last night, and I love doing them.
You post every Sunday, right?
You got it, buddy. Posted every Sunday, Spotify and Apple Podcast, and we have a great time. It's a fast moving, pretty dynamic. 3 guys who can't wait to say have lots of things to get off our chest.
But it sounds like you're all 3 in different locations, though, right?
Yes, Dave Casey lives on the near north shores of Chicago, where I met him in Evanston, Illinois. He lives in Lake Forest, I think, or Winnetka, or Wilmette, near north side of Chicago, near northwestern where we met. Don Woodard lives down in the western parts of North Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina, beautiful. And I live on Long Beach Island, New Jersey. And for people who are listening, the drones have gone. There was a big drone thing going on here, but I saw this on the news. I think it was on Fox, not to mention other people, but somebody said, well, we think these drones are being released from a boat and they're doing intelligence surveillance. And as someone who shares with Bill a Midwestern mentality, here's what I can tell you. If these drones were really looking for intelligence, the last place you're going to start is New Jersey. Thanks, everybody. I just made a million enemies. But let's be honest.
Well, next time I have you on, we'll have to talk about how an Illinois farm guy winds up on the Jersey shore. That's got to be a whole story in itself.
Oh, I'll just put it this way. I paved my way into heaven by moving my wife within 2 minutes of her mother. That's how we got to the great state of New Jersey.
That's a good little punchline, as it were.
Thank you, brother.
So, what is it? We only got a minute or so left. What are your future plans? If you're not spending the time looking back, which I admire, what are you looking ahead to? You're not going to retire, are you?
I worked with a man named Bill Gaither. He's written hymns. He's in a lot of Christian hymnals, especially in the Methodist and Presbyterian and Congregational churches. And I toured with him and he's still on tour. He's got to be in his mid-80s, and I admire him greatly. He's the best boss I ever had. So, and my guess is he's going to go to his maker in a church singing hymns, as is his wont. And I'm not saying that I want to pass away on stage at the Comedy Silo in Des Moines, but if I'm booked, if I'm, and I don't want to use a lot of puns here, but if I'm killing it, what the heck, So I guess when the emails stop coming and the booking requests stop coming in, then that'll be the day, Bill, that I say, you know what, the writing's on the wall and I've passed my time. But this coming weekend, I'm in Florida. I'm at 3 jobs down in south of Tampa. I'm in Northport. I'm in Avon Park. And I can't remember the third place, but I'm flying down to Tampa on Friday. So, and then the following week, I'm at a comedy club just north of Philadelphia in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, the gateway, I think, to Allentown. But I'm in Doylestown, Pennsylvania at the Comedy Cabaret, January 17 and 18. And the following week, I'm back down in Florida doing more. So I'm just working. I'm a working comedy act.
Is there any state or city you've never been to that you want to go to?
I've been to every state in the United States and performed professionally. In fact, I was about a couple of weeks ago, just for the holidays, I was up in Grand Prairie, Alberta, Canada.
I heard you talk about that on the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. I think that says everything you need to know about my act. I have to go to another country to find a gig, and I'll do it gladly. So I was up there, and I've performed in London. I've performed in Australia. I've performed I've had this wild career.
And all the ships at sea.
Oh, well said. Yes, I've done a lot of cruising with the Disney Cruise Line. So, and God bless them, they've taken me around the planet. So, yeah, I keep doing it, and I'm very happy and very pleased and honored and overwhelmed that I'm still getting booking requests, and I just keep plugging away, and I get to meet folks like you. And you and I have a history from another century.
Like I said, we'll have to explore that in a different episode.
Yes, exactly.
Taylor Mason, it has been my great pleasure to have you on Now I've Heard Everything.
I love that.
You can find Taylor Mason on the web at taylormason.com. His podcast is called Stories Unlimited, and that too is on Spotify and everywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also get a copy of Taylor Mason's book, Irreversible, by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're listening to this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my 2012 interview with comedian Gilbert Gottfried.
When I do the Tonight Show, it's like people's favorite part is not the bit so much, but when you screw up totally.
And my 2013 conversation with Jim Gaffigan.
It's interesting, the large family thing. And, obviously we've jumped the shark in many ways. There's a curiosity about how many kids people have.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And you can find us everywhere you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, have you said thank you today? Thank you can actually help improve your life as well as the people you're thanking. My 2007 conversation with veteran TV journalist Deborah Norville.
My job as a journalist, the first bumper sticker I ever got 100 years ago was at a journalism convention. It said, "If your mother says she loves you, check it out." I believe your protestations of love and adoration, but where's the beat?
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.